Well, I think we'll make a start. So hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on this lovely sunny evening, probably the sunniest evening of the entire summer in the UK, especially in my experience of all my days at the beach. So welcome to our event with Lemony Snicket. This event is brought to you as a collaboration between 3 independent bookshops, the Chorleywood Bookshop, the Village Books in Dulwich, and the Sevenoaks Bookshop. So welcome to all of you wonderful independent bookshop shoppers from all 3 of our towns. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. So on to the author of the evening, Mr. Lemony Snicket, aka Daniel Handler, but I think you're going to hear more about that a little bit later on. And having read the book that we're going to be speaking about this evening, I feel very much like I should only refer to him as Mr. Snicket until we are better acquainted. So Mr. Snicket, I'm sure all of you know, among other books, is the author of the 13 novels of a series of unfortunate events. And tonight he's going to be introducing us to his latest book, Poison for Breakfast, which I think is just wonderful. It's a sort of filled with dark and delightful wordsmithery is what I thought when I was reading it. I enjoyed all the wordiness. It's just great. So, and also then our host for this evening is Sam Copeland, who is the author of Charlie Changes into a Chicken and a T-Rex and a Woolly Mammoth, all very popular books in our bookshop. So thank you so much, Sam, for hosting this evening. Just before we start, a tiny bit of housekeeping. The event will last for approximately an hour, and if you have any questions for Mr. Snicket, please do put them in the Q&A box, which you'll find if you just click on the icon at the bottom of your screen. And then towards the end of the event, Sam will ask as many of them as he can for you. So I think that's everything from me. So it just for me to hand over to Sam and Mr. Snicket. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Hello, Mr. Snicket. How are you doing this evening?
Hello, Mr. Copeland. I'm fine, thank you. It is morning where I am.
Oh,
but nevertheless, I wish everyone a good evening.
Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, indeed.
To all the ships at sea.
Yes. So I thought we'd begin with a quick fire round of questions. Just
I'm ready. I'm bracing myself.
Settled in. And as Fleur just said, I'm an author. I go into schools. So I thought
everyone knows who you are, Mr. Copeland. You don't have to
just slip it in. I'd slip it in. And I thought I would ask some genuine questions that have been asked by school children.
Okay.
That I've been asked by school children. So,
but I should answer them for myself. I should not guess what your answers were.
Okay. Okay, first question. Do you live in a mansion?
No.
Okay. What football team do you support?
I support any random group of youths playing football when I walk by. I don't follow any particular organized sport. And even I am from a small backwards country known as the United States, where even the word football means something else entirely. So,
what color are your underpants?
They're usually dark blue.
Okay. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
I wanted to be close to literature.
And did you like your teachers?
Well, some of them. I mean, teachers are, some of them are ghastly. Some of them are charming. Some of them will teach you well, but are otherwise miserable people. Some of them are charming people, but are otherwise miserable teachers. I mean, they're like people in that way, I think.
Did you enjoy school overall?
Yes, but when I was young, I didn't have anything to compare it to. So I don't know what else. Perhaps if I had been, an apprentice for a blacksmith or something, I might have enjoyed that more. I don't know. I didn't do anything else.
Do you have a pet?
I do. I have a small dog.
Called?
His name is Egg Roll.
Egg roll. I've got a dog called Bagel.
Oh, wasn't that interesting? He was rescued, by which I mean someone else rescued the dog. I did not break into a burning building and rescue the dog or anything, but he was the rescuers gave him the name Eggnog. But we thought that a Jewish household shouldn't have a dog named Eggnog, but instead should have a dog named Egg Roll, which is what we consume during the Christmas season.
Yes. What's the worst present you've ever been given?
Pneumonia.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Who would, it was slightly changed for me, this question, it was David Williams, but who would win in a fight, you or Rick Riordan?
Win in a fight? I don't know Mr. Riordan that well. We've met a handful of times. He always seems charming. He's quiet, so maybe he's wily. I honestly think that we would not fight. I think that the closest we would have would be a quiet, cutting disagreement. I don't think we would fight. I think we would both surrender. I think perhaps we would pull out white flags simultaneously as soon as the fight began. Okay.
And last question, and this is actually my least favorite question. I always get asked this, and I never know how to answer this. It's what inspired you to write books?
What inspired me to write books?
Every single time I visit a school, I'm asked that question. What inspired you?
I'm very inspired by blank paper. I find blank paper very inspiring. I keep some near me at all times. Here's an example for people at home who have not seen blank paper before. This is what my blank paper mostly looks like. In America, we call this a legal pad. I don't know what it's called elsewhere.
A4 pad?
All right. Well, it means that everything you write here is perfectly legal. You can write anything you want, and it's perfectly legal. I don't know if that's actually why they call it a legal pad, but I enjoy it. So yes, I'm very inspired by blank paper. When I see something, I would like to write something on it.
Have you ever had a real dose of writer's block? Because a lot of writers find that blank page terrifying.
Yeah, I don't find it terrifying. I go through long periods of writing very poorly. And in fact, some people would say that that's been an unbroken period for more than 20 years. But I write poorly rather than not writing. I believe in creating long, terrible sentences as the first draft at least, rather than creating nothing. What about you? Have you had writer's block?
No, but I started very late in life. So I suppose I've been percolating all the ideas, and I've been doing it for years. It'll happen. It's time
so,
to come, sure.
Well, maybe you had writer's block before you started writing. That would be really handy.
Yeah, and I didn't even know it.
That's right. That would be like having a midlife crisis while you were in the womb.
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I doing? Do I want to be a fetus my whole life? Of course not. That's what a midlife crisis of the womb looks like.
Did you go and visit visiting schools?
I visited many a school. Yeah, I enjoy it very much. I enjoy walking through the hallways and seeing things, affixed to the wall, and to try to figure out what the lesson might be or what student I might find perfectly favorite. I like meeting the young people. I like seeing how exhausted the teaching staff is. I like seeing the architectural marvels of an underfunded school system or an overfunded school system. I enjoy everything about it. Sometimes I feel sorry when listening to me is mandatory. That always seems like a bad sign to me, where they'll say, everyone has to come in and listen to this man speak. That makes me a little sad.
Right, let's talk a little bit about the book.
Okay.
I think it's an extraordinary book. I think it's unlike anything that anybody out there will have read before, really.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
You really should. It is it's a book sort of every page sort of dazzles with something interesting or witty or extraordinary. I absolutely loved it. So there's a chapter in here where you talk about the rules for writing. And you say there are 3 rules for writing. Firstly, use the element of surprise.
Yeah.
Secondly, leave the boring stuff out, which is the same as rule number 1.
Yeah.
And nobody knows the 3rd rule.
No, I haven't met anyone who knows it.
So
do you know it? This is very exciting. You and I have never conversed before. So if you happen to be the one who knows the 3rd one, this is a very exciting day.
I might know it.
Oh.
But I'm not allowed to reveal what it is. It was told to me by a wise old man atop a mountain.
It was Riordan, wasn't it? Now the fight begins.
No, I beat him in a fight. That's how I found out the 3rd rule.
Well, if you can beat him, I can beat him. I'd like to change my answer.
So rules for writing for children. We hear, many rules about writing for children, such as keep the child at the center of the narrative. But this is the book that seems to break many of these rules. In fact, almost every single rule I can think of. So do you think there are any rules, both generally in writing and more specifically for writing for children?
I am not aware of any. When people suggest a rule for writing children's literature, or when they told me I've broken a rule or even adhered to a rule uncharacteristically, I can immediately think of many, many works of children's literature that do not adhere to such a rule. So I think the rules for writing are the same whether you're writing for children or for adults. But, there's sound disagreement on that, but I don't have to listen to people who disagree with me if I don't want to. What about you? Do you think there are rules for writing for young people?
I think, well, I am told there are rules.
Yeah.
And I think when you have success, which we'll talk a little bit more about later if we have time, when you do have success, it gives you the liberty, I think, to disregard rules. And I think at my stage in the career, I think there are certain things that it would be challenging to break. I think if I, for instance, if I were to write a book with no children in, which essentially this book is, then I think I would struggle.
I mean, there are plenty of children's books that don't have children in them. They usually have animals instead of children. But I don't know. I mean, when I was a child, I was very interested in what adults were doing. And so I was given no rules in terms of what I was allowed to pick up and read. And so I often picked up and read books about adults. And sometimes they were confusing to me or even upsetting, but I enjoyed reading that very much. So I would say that's not a great example, I think, of a rule for children's literature. But I think people sometimes forget about the tradition of literature, and that's why I think I find A Blank Page so exciting, is to be reminded that people have written all sorts of books in all sorts of ways under all sorts of circumstances. And so when you start writing, you're participating in a long tradition that is very broad and very deep and doesn't really have any rules as far as I can tell.
I think the one rule that I stick by is don't patronize children. Don't write down to them. And if I'm writing funny, it has to make me laugh. You can't just throw any joke on the page and go, well, a child will laugh at that.
Yeah, I think sometimes that's even important to have things in a book that only you, the author, will laugh at. That seems important to me, actually.
Most of the jokes in my book.
I find this very interesting. I don't care if anyone else does. That's quite a liberating feeling. But I would say not being patronizing is a good rule, but not necessarily for children's literature. I think that's just kind of general good rule in general. No one likes to be patronized, do?
True.
Yeah. Isn't that right? Isn't that right?
In this book, there are so many nuggets of stunning writing, which I mentioned before. Like so much of your writing, it makes me envious, actually. So let me be very clear, I do actually hate you. The book, it glitters with humor and wisdom. So I want to know, how much is craft, where you're chipping away, carving sentences, or how much do these things sort of come to you, like discovering a lump of gold?
Oh, I think it's kind of a combination of the both. I think the harder you work, the more inspired you are, and the more inspired you are, the harder you work, or at least that's how I am. But I like very much that you said that you were envious, not only because in this case it was flattering, but because I think envy and jealousy are a very important part of the writing process. That we all have our own canons of literature, right? The books in our head that are huge monuments, books that we love so much that we read over and over again, and we want to know how they do it. And I think when you're making books, to have that jealousy, to have that hunger is a very important step. To read something and say, oh, I can't believe that was so smart, that was so beautiful, that was so sad, that was so funny, all of those things, I find that really moving and terrific. And so I read very ravenously, and I exist in a state of almost constant literary jealousy of reading something that that I want, that feels a step ahead of what I am doing. So I think that's a very important part if you're a writer, of feeling about literature. If you're only reading literature and you're not writing it, you don't necessarily have to be jealous all the time. But I think if you're a writer, it helps.
On the flip side, when I'm reading, I'm either full of disdain because I could do better than this. I could do this. It's either disdain or jealousy. So reading it's not a very pleasurable experience for me, really. It's incredibly negative.
Yeah, I find that disdain doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't motivate me. I of course feel disdain quite frequently as well. But if I'm very disdainful about a book, I'll put it down. It took me years to learn that. Speaking of rules, I thought the rule was that you had to finish a book when you were reading it. I didn't learn it until I was late in my life that actually you can stop reading a book if you don't like it. You could just put it down. I wasn't aware that was possible for a long time.
Mr. Snicket, this is a book that is preoccupied with death.
Yes.
It is punctuated throughout with death. And you even, talk about rules for children. This, I suppose, is potentially breaking one. You even spend a good few pages asking children to really examine their own death. And you give countless examples of how they could die.
Yeah.
For example, tobogganing or grease fires or whatever. Yeah. So, is this intentional? Are you writing to help children to face up to death? Or is this more of a sort of a cathartic exercise where you're facing up to your own existential thoughts or anxieties?
Well, I don't know how you could help someone else face death. Only if you'd been through it before, I guess. If I were a ghost, then I could come back and say, okay, I know you're worried about death, and here's some tricks I have to make it easier or perhaps to avoid it entirely. I can't really help anyone face death. I can only think that it's something that I began thinking of when I was a child a lot. I understood that my time on the planet was brief compared to the time of the planet, and I understood that I was going to die, and I found that very fascinating, sometimes frightening, but more often fascinating to think about. I used to think to myself, I wonder if this is the last sandwich I will ever eat, and then it wouldn't be. Then I would have to have another sandwich the next day, and I began to think about how that governs our lives and how that governs the way we think and the way we behave. And I know that it's fascinating for young people because children's literature that people pick up tends to be full of threats and terrible things happening. That tends to be interesting to young people. The oldest stories we have for young people, folk and fairy tales, are full of violence and grief and death. And I thought that was all very interesting. So I thought that other young people might find it interesting too. So I don't really, for instance, tell them to think about the ways that they die as much as I just try to list them, because I know that if you are young and you're thinking about death, you have your own list of ways in which it might happen. So yeah, I think so much literature is worrying about death, and this contributes to that tradition. So I think it's just I'm inviting readers to think about death along with me, and then maybe we'll all be a little less lonely.
I'll talk about loneliness in a moment.
Okay.
Do you think that everybody, this is something I do actually, but do you think that everybody has their own list of potential deaths that they might have?
Yeah, because I think when you're a child, if you're being raised, you're being told all the time what will kill you. Don't step off that curb. Don't put your finger in that little thing that looks so alluring in which to put your finger. Don't pet that animal that is not an animal that you want to pet. There's all kinds of ways that you're told over and over again that things are dangerous to you. And so then you begin to think about them. You begin to read about them. And then when you read about them, you encounter more things. You think, oh, I didn't think about the fact that my parents could be killed by zoo animals, but now that I'm reading James and the Giant Peach, this is on my mind. So that's the sort of thing that happens. So I think that, yeah, I think we all have our own lists. When you're unfortunate enough to get, quite elderly as you and I are, then maybe the lists seem more sensible or even more terrifying. But yeah, I think we all develop those lists.
Mine is exploding machinery or walking under scaffolding, the scaffolding collapsing. So if that happens, if I do die under collapsing scaffold, then let this be sort of proof of...
Right. Well, I'll see to it that we put "told you so" on your headstone.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can see to that, actually. I think your nearest and dearest might have a better chance of putting that on your headstone. But yeah, so you don't do you walk under scaffolding anyway? And
well, sometimes I try and avoid it, but sometimes I can't avoid it, and I sort of scuttle through in a panic. I mean, but it's ludicrous. It's not. It's we all know that it'll be my heart or something like that, but it's not fun to fantasize about dying of heart disease.
Well, yeah, you can think about under what circumstances it would happen, whether it would be a crowd and people would, oh my goodness, what's happened to Mr. Copeland? Mr. Copeland, Mr. Copeland, something like that. I could picture that being a lot of fun. Lately, because not so recently, I was out in what in America we call the wilderness, and I briefly saw a bear, and the bear was nowhere close to me, and the bear did not even know I was there, let alone was interested. But since then, I've thought, oh, I really hope I don't die of bear. I don't have a bear mauling or any other thing that a bear likes to do when it becomes enraged at a person. That seems like a way that I would not want to go.
It'd be a horrible way to go, but great for the obituary.
Yeah.
I mean, what an ending.
Yeah. Well, my wife used to say to me that I was not allowed to die under a circumstance in which the obituary would say unfortunate event, etc. But the more we've thought about it, the more that the only other thing is fortunate event. The only other thing is for me to become such a horrible person that the world would breathe a sigh of relief upon my death. That's the only way to avoid having it say unfortunate event. And so I'm just stuck.
Are you working on that?
No, I don't think so. Nastiness doesn't really come naturally to me, and I don't see that as a particular goal. I'm just resigned to the fact that people will mourn me, which I discussed in Poison for Breakfast. And I think that's another thing that oftentimes when you're young, you like to think, well, if something terrible happened to me, think of all the people who would be sad and wish they treated me better and things like that. That's always a very delicious fantasy. Yeah, you'll feel bad when I'm dead is a nice thing to think to yourself when someone is mean to you.
Yeah. You write a line here, even though the author is dead, her work still haunts people, which could mean she was a ghost too. So was this ever a sort of a driver for your writing, in that do you feel relieved that undoubtedly your books will be read after your death?
Well, I don't think about that so much, but I guess I think about how lovely I find the tradition of reading, and how you can have a conversation with a long dead author. You can participate in something that happened a long time ago because of the reading experience. So currently, I didn't know this would come up, so I have to reach behind me. Currently, for instance, I'm reading with a friend of mine. A friend of mine and I have a 2-person reading epic poetry out loud club, and we are reading this, the ancient epic of the Finnish people. It was written a long time ago. No one was alive when it was written. No one was alive when their grandparents weren't alive when it was written, and yet you can commune with this text. You can read it and be alone with it and feel that you're in conversation. That seems very important to me. So if people get to do that with my work, then I hope they have a good time. I know I won't be there to enjoy it or hear about it, but I like thinking about the fact that literature keeps moving on and people keep picking up books and reading them. That inspires me.
Mm, lovely. And is the finished poetry good?
Yeah, so far. We're pretty early into it. So far, it's still the creation of the world, which seems centered oddly around Finland, which is not, I think, how a lot of people think about the world is centered around Finland. So it's nice to think that Finns do, or did.
So I think one of the things that many people find more terrifying than death is loneliness, something you talk about.
Yeah.
And am I allowed to read a little passage from here, which I thought was
Absolutely
an extraordinary.
We were just saying there are no rules in literature, so of course you're allowed to read it.
Okay. It is low. It will take me a couple of minutes to read this. I hope you'll indulge me.
I have nothing else to do right now.
It is lonely sometimes to be alone, but some people are good at being lonely. I am one of them. I am a loneliness savant. A word which here means that loneliness comes naturally to me. So I'm quite good at loneliness, if I do say so myself. I like to think about lonely things, poems and philosophies and sad songs I admire, and places and people I do not know or will never see again. It is said in a song I admire by another associate of mine, the loneliest people in the whole wide world are the ones you're never going to see again. This is the sort of thing I like to think about. Lonely thoughts and lonely language and lonely things that happened a long, lonely time ago. Things that you tell yourself walking on the gravelly ground under a tree that has been there for a long time do not matter. Telling yourself that something does not matter is one of the loneliest things you can do, because you only say it, of course, about things that matter very much, but often, and this is the lonely part, they only matter to you. I think that's an extraordinarily wise and beautiful few sentences on loneliness.
Thank you.
Go on.
I was happily accepting your compliment.
Okay.
But I meant every word of it. I enjoy being lonely. I like to encourage others to be lonely and to practice being lonely. One of the picture books I did with Lisa Brown, who happens to be my wife, is a book called Goldfish Ghost, which is about being lonely. And one of the most fun we had at a school visit was going to schools and having various loneliness contests and loneliness exercises to watch children compete to be the loneliest. I liked it very much. I think it's an important part of life to be lonely and to enjoy it.
Well, I think if I had read that as a child, it might have helped me in some of my darker, lonelier times. I think it's great that you are talking about loneliness and in such positive terms. So you do think it's something to be embraced. And do you think it's harder for children to be positively lonely with the rise of social media?
I think it's harder for all of us. I think as the world gets more and more interconnected and we feel crowded, that it is, it can be hard to find a little space of loneliness all to yourself, other than in your own head, and your own head can easily be distracted. It's sad, for instance, to me that the circumstances mean that you and I are not in the same room in a bookshop having this conversation, which I think would be more enjoyable. And would feel a little lonely, perhaps, because we would be there in a small room and everyone would be gathered around, and it would be kind of a nice thing, as opposed to the artificiality of doing it on screen. I don't like that there is a screen that is also my mailbox and my television set and supposedly where I'm supposed to be writing, which is why I use the blank paper I was showing off lately rather than a computer. But yeah, I think it's harder to get good at loneliness than maybe it was 1,000 years ago.
I don't recall reading any arguments for loneliness. I suppose there was indulging in melancholy would be the closest. So I thought it was really interesting. Do you still find time to be lonely?
Oh yes, I'm lonely every day. I make sure of it.
Great. Okay. You wrote a line in this, well, many lines in this, which jumped out to me, but one in particular. Oh no, it wasn't this. It was somewhere else. I think we put on disguises sometimes to pose as people we are not, to hide or to blend in, or just to see what will happen, hoping that our secrets will never be found out. Was that why you used your pseudonym?
Was that why? I think it's probably somewhere in that category. I thought it would be interesting to try to increase the mystery surrounding a book, because when I was young, I was very interested in books and where they came from, and I often didn't know. And I thought that that was really interesting to me. And I thought a mysterious narrator, for as long as it was possible to do so, was an elegant way to go. I liked, when I grew up in a house full of books, but we didn't always know where they came from. I couldn't even figure out what books were. I had no context sometimes for understanding what a book was. I have a very clear memory of, I was in the library, the public library, and I had decided that I was going to try to read all of the books in reverse alphabetical order, all of the novels in reverse alphabetical order. And I started with P.G. Wodehouse. I don't know why there wasn't like a book by Emile Zola or anyone else whose name started with X, Y, and Z. Maybe that was a shelf that I missed somehow. But I started with P.G. Wodehouse, who I'd never heard of.
Good place to start.
Yeah, but I remember that I started reading it and I thought, this is ridiculous. And then I read a little further and I thought, oh, it's supposed to be ridiculous. It's funny. I didn't know it was funny. For the first paragraphs, it wasn't packaged in such a way that was encouraging me to be funny. And that was one of many literary mysteries that I've had in my life, but I really liked not knowing it. And it was very interesting when to start a series of unfortunate events and to say that these books were a source of mystery even before you opened them. That was exciting to me.
How long were you able to keep the pseudonym for, and what was the story with
I mean, arguably, I still keep it. You're only taking my word for it that it's me, that I've written all these books. I'm just appearing on screen. I'm just some man in a tie. I'm just a man who got dressed up for the occasion.
You had to bring in the tie, didn't you?
But I think as digital culture became more and more permeable, and as particularly young people had access to it, that it was you could find out instantaneously who I was, and there was nothing to be done.
I mean, a lot of writers would shy away from using a pseudonym because they want that public validation. They want that recognition. They want their old schoolmates to be like, wow, look what Mr. Snicket's become, look what Mr. Copeland's become. So you clearly don't. So my question to you is, why are you so weird? Why don't you want that validation? And have you ever wanted any validation of any kind?
I'm so caught up in the fantasy that people who wouldn't like you in school would somehow feel off-put by learning you'd become an author. Wouldn't that just confirm the reason why they were scorning you to begin with? I think most writers...
It's a very glamorous job, isn't it? That's what outsiders like. Wow, author. Wow. We know what we're doing right now is the slightest bit glamorous.
I think what we're doing right now is just about as glamour as it gets for an author. We get to sit around and talk about things. That's the life of glamour that we lead. So I love the fantasy of, oh, you found me, unattractive and worthy of ridicule when we were 14 years old, but do I have news for you? I am now an author. Why are you, oh, you're laughing again at me? Oh, drat. Oh, this isn't working out the way I pictured it for years. What a wasted life. I've wasted my life going into literature just to make you feel less of a, sorry.
That's what when we talk about inspiration, that's what inspires me. Revenge on old bullies.
Oh my goodness, we have to talk about
this. You're ruining my
How were you mistreated? Just say his name. Let's make him worthy of scorn in public. No, I mean, like any human being, I think I like to be seen sometimes and to feel validated by people. appreciating my work. And so I received many letters and other forms of communication from people who like them. But I mean, I've read and enjoyed your work, and you're full of flattery for me this evening, and that's enough validation for me. I know I find to the glare of kind of actual public conversation to often be very bewildering and maybe even frightening. But yeah, I enjoy I like someone saying, that was good, I liked that you did that, and I say, oh, thank you. And then we move on to other topics.
Whose opinion do you judge more highly, children or adults?
On my own work, I presume you mean, not in general.
No, not on your dress sense or anything like that.
Well, one thing that I like about writing for children is that I think you never love a book the way you love a book when you were 10 years old. That you take it with you, you carry it in your mind, and that when you really love a book, the boundaries of it are actually very loose. Your landscape around you changes, which I talk a little bit about in Poison for Breakfast, when you love a book so much. And that when you're older, you may have a vast appreciation for a book, but you don't have that lovely feeling when you're like walking someplace as a child and you're kind of the hero of the book that you're thinking about, or maybe the friend of the hero. You're kind of living in this space in which a story, or even many stories, all began to fit together that are happening inside your head. I think that's a magical space to be a part of. And so when I feel that I've become part of that space for some readers that I meet, I think that's a profound compliment. And I don't think a profound compliment from an adult would ever be able to carry that kind of weight. But of course, there are many adults whose opinions I trust and who I love. And so if they tell me that they like something, I take that opinion seriously as well. And if they tell me that I've done something wrong or that I haven't, I take that to heart as well.
It is an extraordinary feeling getting letters from children, though. It's a true honor, I think, to be a children's writer.
It is. I think it's a kind of enthusiasm and appreciation for literature that is only approximated as people get older. So I like doing it, and I like being around the authors for children who think about that. That's exciting.
You are fortunate enough to have seen your books turn into movies and TV shows and the computer game as well. So how was that experience?
Very strange. A very strange experience. I have a very clear memory of the first time I went onto the set when they were filming the movie, and they had built a lake inside what they kept calling an abandoned aircraft factory. I don't know why they called it abandoned. It was full of people building a lake, but they said it was abandoned, which seems unlikely to me. But they were building a lake, which was already crazy because I don't know how many people who are listening have been to the United States, but we have lakes. We have several of them. We don't need to build one, but we built one for the purpose of the movie. And everyone was running around, and I kept thinking to myself, I only said lake because I thought it would be interesting. I didn't know everyone would have to build a lake. This seems like a whole lot of work just because I thought something might be interesting. And yeah, it's a very bewildering experience. Film and television are very different from writing because they are extremely collaborative. No matter what kind of a dictatorial auteur you are in the land of film and television, you have hundreds of people working on the film. And they're all doing their own thing. They think the sleeve ought to look like this. They think that the light ought to hang here and shine in such a way. They think that the camera ought to move on this track and get closer and closer and closer somehow. So I think it's a bewildering experience. It can be fun, it can be painful, but I found it bewildering most of all. That
another word you use quite regularly in your book.
Yeah, I use it more and more in my life, I think, because I feel it more and more. But even for the Netflix adaptation, which I was more heavily involved with for a longer period of time than I was in the film, I still found it strange because I had a small group of writers. We met in my dining room, which I'm pointing to for ease of clarity, and even though we were all working together and I was supervising them, of course, the way in which they were adapting the story was from their own imagination. And so they went places I hadn't thought, they wrote things that hadn't occurred to me. And even that within just writing it was already a collaborative and interesting experience. And that's confusing, but is the way of the world.
Were you happy with the end result?
I'm happy that people seem happy with it. I have heard from families, and I think particularly during COVID, when all of us were staring at our screens even more than we might normally do, I heard from many families during COVID who said, this is the thing that we like to do, and we're having such a hard time, and in the evening we'll watch an episode of this show and we'll all be laughing together, or we'll all kind of be snuggling, a word I hate to say out loud, but is of course really lovely to do. And so they, like most people, seem happy with it, and that makes me happy.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about success, and then I think by the time we finish talking about success, we might go on to you for a little reading of voice.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you wouldn't mind, cast your mind back to 1999, and you've just had your adult debut published the year before. You've got Bad Beginnings coming out in September of that year.
Yeah.
And you've also got the album 69 Love Songs by The Magnetic Field. Now, there can't be many people who've had a year like that. Was this as happy a time as one might imagine it to be? Did that success bring happiness?
I mean, I don't find my happiness linked to success, but I wish I read novel The Base Gate on my honeymoon, which was at the time a romantic experience. I don't know if my wife would call that romantic anymore, to say, let's just stay in this apartment we've been borrowing and make sure all the commas are in the right place. What do you say? But we had a lovely time then. And you can trace it to 1999, but what happened in terms of the other things that you mentioned, both in terms of a series of unfortunate events and in terms of 69 Love Songs, was to watch something that we all assumed would be very small and have a tiny little cult following actually get much bigger. And so I went on a tiny tour for the release of The Bad Beginning and The Reptile Room, and hardly anyone showed up at any location, but I met a few very excited young people who were there for it, and that felt incredibly gratifying. I remember I called my editor, I called my publisher, I called my wife, and I said, oh, this is like and they were saying, wait, only 4 people came? And I said, yes, but one of them was so excited. And I said, but only 4 people? And I said, yeah, but one of them, she was so excited. And that felt like a success. And similarly, I mean, I don't know how many people listening or know 69 Love Songs, but 69 Love Songs is an album by the Magnetic Fields, a band that I get to play in every so often. And we performed that album twice in its entirety over 4 nights at a small club in New York at the Knitting Factory, which is now gone. It was completely sold out. We had a lovely time. And we also thought, wasn't that nice? I have one or two dedicated readers scattered across the country, and we have enough people in New York who are interested in this record that we've played 4 nights in this tiny little club, and it's standing room only. And then as the years progressed, both those things got larger and were closer to a large mainstream audience than either Stephen Merritt, who leads the Magnetic Fields, or I had any intention of those things being. So that's what I think of that time. If I were to go back to 1999, I would try to tell myself things that would happen in 2002 or 2003, and I wouldn't believe me. And I think it would be the same if I told Stephen Merritt, if I said, in a very short time, you're going to be in London at the Hammersmith playing this album in its entirety, and it's going to be entirely sold out, and Peter Gabriel's going to come on the stage at the end, and sing an encore with you. And
Extraordinary.
he would say, I don't know who you are, time traveler, but you're entirely wrong on what is happening. So I think that's what was startling about those things.
Brilliant. So finally, what next for you?
Finally, what next for me? The finally sounded so dire after all this talk of death. What's the last thing you'll do, Mr. Handler? We're working on a stage experience for Lemony Snicket. It's not an adaptation of our previous work, but it is a new stage idea that I've been working on. I've been working with a different songwriter who will soon be announced publicly, and I wish I could announce it publicly now because it would be very exciting. Yeah, it's really fun. And then and we're in the fun part of starting it out, and so I'll send him a little scene that leads into, and now there should be a song here, and then he'll send me an idea for a song, and I'll say, oh, that changes the scene, then let me change the scene, and then he says, well, now the song's a little different, and we're going from there. It's been a quite enjoyable experience. So that's what I've been working on. But I'll be returning to books before long because collaboration is exhausting.
Yes. Mr. Snicket, thank you. It's been wonderful. Now, do you mind giving a little reading from your marvelous new book?
I do not mind. You had mentioned the rules for reading, which is normally what I read from, but instead I'm going to read right from the beginning, and we'll just go from there. Chapter 1, that's how I began it. This morning I had poison for breakfast. This book is about bewilderment, a word which here means the feeling of being bewildered. And bewildered is a word which here means you don't have any idea what is happening. And you is a word which doesn't just mean you. It means everyone. You have no idea what is happening, and nobody you know has any idea what is happening. And of course, there are all the people you don't know, which is most of the people in the world, and they don't know what is happening either. And of course, I don't know what is happening, or I wouldn't have eaten poison for breakfast. Everything that happens in this book is true, by which I mean that it all really happened. The poison and the poems, the deadly cactus and the hypnotic musician, the chicken and the egg, and the fatal finale. A phrase which here means that death is at the end of the story. But the story begins at breakfast, which I fix myself as I enjoy doing. It won't be necessary for you to remember what I had for breakfast because I will keep mentioning it. But it was tea with honey, a piece of toast with cheese, one sliced pear, and an egg perfectly prepared. And all of it, as I have mentioned, I fixed myself and ate all up while reading whatever I pleased. I've been fixing my own breakfast for many years. Beginning one summer when I was quite small and I was with my family in a house we were borrowing. The house was on the shore of a lake, which was quite large and quite cold, and a small flock of geese would gather on the sand, having loud conversations and making a mess. The geese will go away, the owner of the house told us, as long as you don't feed them, but the geese never went away, not all summer. In the morning, I would wake up and go by myself to the kitchen. The early sun would shine on the lake, the ripples so shiny and sharp that they looked like knives. I read something once that describes the sea as all a case of knives, and I have never forgotten it. It is a description I admire very much because it is so startling that you know no one else has thought of it before the author did, and yet so perfectly clear that you wonder why you never thought of it yourself. All good writing is like this. It's why a favorite book feels like an old friend and a new acquaintance at the same time, and the reason a favorite author can be a familiar figure and a mysterious stranger all at once. That seems like a good place to stop.
Brilliant. And actually, that case of knives description is absolutely, it's, you know, we wanted to about envy. It's perfect.
Exactly. We're both envious of Elizabeth Bishop. How did she get to it before we did?
Yeah. But the depressing thing is, I think I never would have got there. But anyway,
yeah.
Let's see.
Something else. She never wrote Charlie Turns into a Chicken.
She did not. Some questions from the audience.
Oh, all right.
This is from anonymous attendee.
Anonymous attendee.
Which is,
I believe we've met before.
How long does it take you to write a book?
Well, I always hate to be cheeky about it, but it really depends what you mean. I wrote a very terrible first draft of Poison for Breakfast in a single summer, so about 3 or 4 months to write a terrible first draft. And then I put it away because it was so terrible that I didn't want to look at it for a while. And I picked up maybe a few months later, and then I worked another set of months on it. So it probably was being 6 or 8 months to get it into some kind of working order. And then I sent it to my editor, and there was much communication about some of the supposed rules that were being broken and whether or not this was possible. So it took a long time for it to be published, but yeah, it usually takes me, I would say, about a year all told to write a book of about this length.
I'm going to go directly to this question because it's from a child, and that's the first one thing. Hi, Lemony.
Hello.
This is Jojo. I'm writing a murder mystery. Do you have tips for young authors? And how? Second question. How did you come up with the Baudelaire?
How did I come up with the Baudelaires?
So first, do you have tips for a young author?
I have tips for a young author. I do. One of my tips is that you should think first of the excuse you will have when you're caught eavesdropping. Eavesdropping is a very important part of being a writer. It means you are listening to people and they do not know you are listening to them. And maybe you're listening outside the door. Maybe you're in a public setting where they're at the next table or they're nearby on the lawn and you're listening to them. The trouble is that when you're often caught. Everyone is caught eavesdropping from time to time. You might get a glare and you need to have your excuse ready right now. It's good to have a book with you. This is a book of imposing German poetry that I enjoy reading. So if I were eavesdropping right now and then someone said, hey, I would just say, I'm sorry, what? As if to say, I was so immersed in my German poetry that even though it looked like I was listening to you, I wasn't. So it's good to have your excuse with you. I like to have a notebook with me. This is my current notebook. It is very small. I will hold a pen next to it so you can see how small it is. It has very
nice. We don't know how big the pen is, so that's...
That's right. This pen is 9 feet tall. And it was purchased in the country of India, and the paper is beautiful in a particular way that I associate with India. I have a notebook with me because if I think of something, then I want to write it down right away. Those are my tips. For a murder mystery, I think we're talking once again about the element of surprise is key in a murder mystery. I recently experienced a mysterious story in which someone was suddenly shoved off a cliff. You had no idea what was going to happen. They were just standing on the cliff talking. And I thought, well, that was an exciting thing. That I want to know more about. So I recommend the element of surprise.
Okay. And there was the question about how did you come up with the Baudelaires? There's another question here from Tabs near Sevenoaks. How do you come up with the character names? So a sort of general question, how do the characters come to you and where do you get their names from?
Well, this is something that I have an argument about with different authors because I tend to think of a story first and then characters, and other authors think of a character first and then story. And so sometimes when the subject comes up among authors, there's a very dull argument because, as with most things, they're basically saying the same thing. So I would think to myself, oh, getting thrown down an elevator shaft, that would be interesting. And then I would think, well, who should be thrown down an elevator shaft? And then the obvious answer would be 3 orphans. They would be terrified and they've already suffered so much. Why not throw them down an elevator shaft? And then I would think, who would do the throwing though? And then I would think, well, it's someone who lives on the top of a building where there would be a long elevator shaft. And then I would think, well, that's a penthouse. Who might live in the penthouse? And then I would think, maybe a terrible rich woman. And I would think, well, let's give her a name. Let's think of some terrible women that we know. And then you might go into a kind of long reverie about someone who's mistreated you. And then you would say, but they liked a book by J.D. Salinger. And then J.D. Salinger has a short story called For Esme with Love and Squalor. And then you might say, Esme Squalor seems like the perfect name for a terrible woman to push a bunch of orphans down an elevator shaft. And then you're kind of off to the races, as I believe you say in your country.
We do, yeah. A few quick fire questions now. This is from Georgia. What's your favorite book you've written and why? I like your books, by the way.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, Georgia. I feel various stages of mortification and shame about everything that I've written. Moving on.
Same question. That was the same question from James as well. He also asked that sexy question.
All right. Well,
which is your favorite? This is from Charles. Which is your favorite Baudelaire child?
Which is my favorite Baudelaire child? Oh, that's terrible to think about. Oh, I don't know. Do I have to choose?
This question's actually from Arthur, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Arthur. First of all, I'm sorry I misnamed you.
It was me who did the misnaming.
It was really Mr. Copeland's fault. And then secondly, no, I don't know what my favorite is. All of them, I'm envious. We've talked about envy. I'm envious of all of them because I don't think I have the inventive and manual dexterity of Violet. I read a lot, but unlike Klaus Baudelaire, I don't seem to retain anything or particularly any useful information that might get me out of trouble. And of course, I just have regular teeth and I talk in a regular way, and I'm unable to, for instance, climb up an elevator shaft while shoving my teeth into a wall over and over again. So I'm envious of Sunny Baudelaire too. I'm generally envious of all babies, though. They do it so well.
Good question here, and there's an obvious answer, which if you don't give me the obvious answer, there's going to be trouble. If you could collaborate with another author to write a book, who would you collaborate with, and what would you write about?
I, of course, would collaborate with my close friend, Sam Copeland.
There we go.
Greatest authors the world has ever seen. There, I hope I did that well. I got my lines just before we came on here.
Perfect. This is an interesting question.
I'm ready.
That last question was Alison. This next question is from Megan. After your books are published, do you enjoy rereading them?
Do I enjoy rereading them? No, I don't. I think about them, and when I need to reread them for one reason or another, I am often stricken with shame.
This is from Lucy. We talked about success, and she's asking about rejections. Did you get your first book published by a traditional publishing route with a literary agent? And if so, did you get many rejections?
I got many, many rejections. I did go the traditional route, and I believe the final count was 37 rejections, but sometimes I think it was 39. I can never remember. It was a lot of rejections. They were, often the rejections felt very cruel and callous. A number of them were addressed to David Handler, a name which is neither the name that I use nor the name that I have, and would perhaps indicate not reading something so carefully.
Yeah.
No, rejection is terrible. It's a horrible feeling.
Yeah.
I'm sure Mr. Copeland has had rejection too. And it's also humiliating because in the world of rejection, in the literary world, that's seen as not a high class rejection. It's not like you've been thrown out of your home or something. And so people have limited sympathy for it. They say, oh, you'll get them next time. And you say, but I'm so overwhelmed with despair right now. Can't you take me into your arms for several hours and tell me that we'll be okay? And the person says, I'm a train conductor, sir. I don't have time to do that. And you should really be weeping to people that you know.
This from James. Who is your favorite villain and why?
Who is my favorite villain? Like, ever? I mean, Humbert's pretty bad in Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita.
Yeah.
But he's fun to read about.
Yeah.
Grendel's a good villain. I've always enjoyed a good monster. Actually, Grendel's mother. I take that back. Forget Grendel. Grendel's mother, who comes out in Gilgamesh. She's a good one. Who's your favorite villain, Mr. Copeland?
Oh my goodness. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not ready for questions. I'm asking.
I would assume the British answer would be Margaret Thatcher, but I don't know.
This is from Emma O'Brien.
Emma.
It is not a question. This is a comment. I don't really have a question, but I need to tell you, I wrote my dissertation on the influence of Alice in Wonderland on contemporary literature, focusing on A Series of Unfortunate Events and Coraline by Neil Gaiman, and I got a first, so thank you.
Well, isn't that nice? I hope that was well done as a dissertation. I can't wait to tell Mr. Gaiman next time I see him that we're the subject of a joint dissertation.
Right, one last question. What would it be?
It's got to be a large philosophical question that sums up the entire conversation we've had this evening. Loneliness, death, literature, rejection, Whoever hurt your feelings so badly when you were young that you're driven by revenge, your entire literary life is driven by revenge on them. This has got to sum up the whole thing. All of Mr. Copeland's deep troubles, all of my splendid loneliness.
Okay, and that question is, what was your favorite book when you were 10 years old?
When I was 10 years old, my favorite book was The Bear's Famous Invasion of Sicily by Dino Buzzati, an Italian author. An illustrator. He illustrated this book himself, and it is about a bunch of bears who invade Sicily. I think of it endlessly. I love it very much. I usually have a copy right here, but I think actually that my wife has my copy that is normally right here on my desk. It's a wonderful book. I bullied it back into print fairly recently, so you can find it if you want. It's called The Bear's Famous Invasion of Sicily, and you can read it, and as with everyone who reads it, you'll probably say, it's okay, but it's my favorite.
Right, that's a perfect hour. That wraps it up.
Wonderful. And look here, the charming people from the bookstore.
Hi. So,
hi.
That was brilliant fun. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sam, guiding us through this evening. And Mr. Snicket, excellent evening. Excellent. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. All three bookshops have copies of this beautiful book. So lovely, great cover, just lovely, touchy-feely, and I know you're going to love reading it. So thank you everyone for joining us, and especially Mr. Snicket and Sam. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Adios.
Thank you.
There we go.